Aloha, guys. I'm Dazen Hakias. I'm the host of Healing with Aloha, located on the island of Kauai. I'm grateful to have you guys join us today. Today's special guest is Autumn Toelle-Jackson. Um, she has lived a life of love and loss, filled with happiness and marked by tragedy. I'm honored to have her here because we're going to experience loss, but sometimes it's sooner than we expected. And the ability to connect to people who can understand your loss, it helps in your healing. It helps you in not feeling like you're alone. And so without further ado, guys, I wanted to introduce you. This is Autumn. Hi, Autumn.
Hi, thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Can you please share with them a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I am a 38-year-old woman. I live in Eastern Oregon in a very rural area. I really I like being outdoors. I like reading. I like spending time with family, and I try to keep things pretty simple. So there's a lot of other stuff that's tied to grief, which I assume we'll get into, but that's the gist of me.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think like grief is something that is such a unique experience, and you can't like throw it all like, okay, this is what you're gonna go through. This is the steps and whatnot. And although it's out there and everybody says, oh, grief stages and whatnot, can you share with them what you've learned from your experience with grief?
The biggest thing I learned over mostly the last 7 years. So in 2015, my 30-year-old husband went for a jog and died on the side of the road. His heart stopped. They don't know what caused it. And at that point, we had a 3-year-old and a newborn. So, of course, I really struggled, which is an understatement, but there are no words to explain what it's like. But that was 7 years ago, and I've tried to focus on my grief and on learning how I grieve specifically, which a lot of times really involved me reading and listening and hearing how other people grieve, so I could start to recognize the bits and pieces that I had in common with somebody else. And then I could learn to embrace my grief. One of the biggest things, which actually just in the last year or two that I've really gotten better at, is if something triggers me and I feel sad, one, I don't need to be ashamed about it, because it's okay to cry and feel sad because somebody you love died. You're allowed to feel sad about that, and you don't need to hide it. And the other part is, if I let it happen and I let myself feel those feelings right away, it takes so much pressure off of me, because I used to have a habit of, I'll deal with it later. I'll deal with it later.
Hold up.
Which you never want to go back and deal with it. So you don't deal with it. It just builds up until it completely crushes you. But if I took the time to cry, if I felt like I needed to cry, it didn't build up as much. And instead of having really long, horrible periods, I'd have much shorter, horrible periods. And in the in-betweens were better.
That's interesting that you say that, because we were talking about right before we came on about how like it's shattering. It was an unexpected event, and then all of a sudden you're like, well, like, what do I do now? That's kind of like how I felt too when my sister died. It was unexpected. I talked to her at 5 o'clock, and that night she had passed away from being in a vehicle accident. And it's like there's no glue that could put your heart and just your life back together again. And like you said, like years go by and there's things that come up, and then it reminds you of them. And I've learned to make it like waves, like you let it flow through the sadness, the emotions, whatever is normal, and it's healthy.
Yeah.
I think maybe culturally, depending how we were raised, sometimes we were told like don't cry, or like it's not appropriate or whatnot. But what's appropriate to you may not be appropriate to you. Doesn't matter. I gotta do what I gotta do to help myself emotionally, mentally, and physically.
Yeah, it's funny how once you do go through your own grief experience, you realize how many things you said to other people who are grieving that you probably shouldn't have said. And even still, I've lost a husband, I've lost my daughter, I've lost a number of other people close to me. And still, when somebody comes and tells me they lost somebody, my first instinct is like, oh, it'll be okay. And I have to stop myself and be like, that's not helpful. And it might be okay, but that doesn't matter.
Right, in due time. What? Okay, so let's talk about this because you and I can relate. What have you found you think would be more beneficial to tell someone who's just dealt with a recent loss? What have you find that is like, okay, rather than saying what you just said, what would you recommend? Because some people need to be educated.
Yeah.
If you've never lost anyone, you're gonna say, you know.
Yeah. I think I have kind of a two-parter, and it's never is easy, but the two things I tell people who want to support somebody who's grieving is one, just be there for them. You don't need to fix it. We live in a culture that wants to fix everybody. They want to make it okay. They want to take your pain away, and you can't fix grief. You can't bring back the person they lost.
Mhm.
And so don't try. But be there for them. If they need you, great. If they don't, they at least know you're right there. And so sometimes just sitting in that uncomfortable thing when the person who's grieving is so shattered that even having any sort of conversation is too difficult, just sit there. And it can be hard, but it can be really helpful. And the other part I would recommend is if you feel like you want to do something, great. Don't just say, what can I do to help? Or let me know if you need anything. Um, I like to use this example with kids because I had kids. So say, I'm going to come get your kids at 4 o'clock on Friday and take them to the park. Are you okay with that? Because
Mm,
it's a lot easier for me just to say, yeah, that's fine, than to say no. And also, it kind of it takes away me having to ask, because asking people for help can be very hard.
yeah,
And
'cause
so,
don't want to be a burden. Yeah,
yeah.
like something simple like that,
Or
right?
I'm going to the grocery store. I'm going to get you food. What do you want me to get you? Or else I'll just get you whatever I think you need.
Oh,
Something like that, where it's like, I'm going to help you and you can either participate or not. But either way, you're going to be getting something.
no, I love it, and people gotta eat. Like that's why I tell
Yeah.
people, hey, if it's on your heart to buy food, you know, do it. I'm gonna order you food you for
Yeah.
dinner. Don't worry, I got you. Like
Yeah.
those little things makes a difference because sometimes you feel when you're grieving, you feel forgotten. Like everybody's like getting ready for the funeral, right?
Yeah.
Everybody's at the funeral, and
Mhm.
then the funeral happens, and boom, like everybody goes back to life, and then you're like,
Yeah.
did it really happen?
Yeah. It's nice to have the people that stick around after that, like a month or two, because it seems like people kind of are there to help, and then there's a funeral, and then a few fewer people are there, and then there's a few left, and then other people. It feels like other people move on with their lives, which their lives never stopped in the same way anyway. So of course they're moving on, but I always tend to feel stuck, and like everybody else is going on and has already forgotten. Um, and it's hard. You really have to remember that they are living a different experience.
Yes, and even if it's in your family, everybody responds and like processes it different too. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
you lost your husband, the mom lost a son, the
Hmm.
sibling, and everybody. And then some people don't want to talk about it. Like maybe you
Yeah.
want to talk about it and carry on the memories and remember that one time. No, I don't want
Hmm.
to. No, remember that one time. And so it's like knowing when you're dealing with people who are grieving with you,
Hmm.
like knowing their boundaries.
Yeah. And I think it's really important to help you grieve is also just learning about your grief. And then in doing that, you can also learn how other people grieve. So my husband Joe died in 2015, and I ended up being remarried in 2017, to Kyle. And Kyle was actually, he had lost his father. And so he had become my grief person after Joe. And then crazily to me, he became more than that. And I was very much attracted in dating somebody while I was still grieving my husband. And we talked about my husband all the time. So the dynamics were very weird. But we got married and we had a daughter, and she passed away at 3 months. And so when she passed away in 2018, I knew how I grieved from Joe and from taking the time. And I had therapy and I had people to talk to and support that really helped me learn about my grief. So when our daughter Riley died, I knew how I was going to grieve. And
Yeah.
Kyle, because he had experienced the loss of his father, he knew how he would grieve. And I remember she ended up being declared brain dead, and we chose to donate her organs. So between knowing she was gone and leaving the hospital, we had 3 or 4 days. And I remember we were laying in the family room they gave us when we were taking one of our really short breaks away from her. And we're like, okay, let's lay it out. This is what I'm going to do. And this is what he was going to do. And these are where we're going to have our conflicts. And we were able to kind of talk through our grief. So it was a very different experience, but understanding it and understanding how we did different things was really helpful. And I like to talk about it. To me, I'm probably most comfortable now talking about grief than almost anything else. But he doesn't want to. He'll talk about it with me if I'm having a hard day. Like I said, he was my grief person, so he can talk about it, but he doesn't search it out the same way I do. And that's just because we're different people.
Right. No, and I think that's important because like I was telling you, like I have friends who recently lost their husbands, and finding people who care and who want to talk to them, and it's been hard, you know what I mean? Not everybody wants to touch it, but it's part of life. We're all gonna die, you know.
Yeah.
One instant or another, we're gonna all die, and some sooner than later. Do you have any suggestions or advice for widows?
If I can make a recommendation, I suggest if you're a widow to reach out to Soaring Spirits International. They have some amazing resources. They do social groups all over the world now, actually. They have a thing called Camp Widow, which is a retreat that they do in San Diego and Tampa and Toronto. And I think they did one in Australia last year. But there's nothing quite like being surrounded with 200 or 300 other people that haven't experienced your loss, but they've experienced a similar loss. So really reach out and find somebody who gets it, because that was the huge difference, was having somebody I could talk to that understood both the frustration and anger you feel that you're all by yourself. When you got married, you weren't supposed to be all by yourself. And also can understand if you make a joke that may be considered in bad taste in normal society.
Right, but you guys, you're like,
yeah, you're kind of on the same page. It's like, oh yeah, I get that. But for me, it was really finding support of some sort. Finding people I could talk to that really understood it was a game changer. It probably helped save my life.
Yeah, I agree. Finding even just one person that is like, they're not going to judge you, and that they understand that you're having anxiety or you're going through an episode of depression and you still want to deal with anybody, to feel like you have a lifeline, like that.
Yeah.
That is a lifesaver.
It is. And the judgment, that was a huge thing, because I live in a really small town. There's 3,000 people in this town, and my husband was born and raised here. So everybody knew him. And I was surprised that a few months after he died, like I said, I was still very much grieving him, I started to have feelings for another person. And so I was very concerned about that judgment. I was concerned people would think I didn't love my husband because I was dating somebody else already. And when I tried to talk about my feelings with family and friends, who were very supportive, they'd be like, well, are you sure you're not just trying to fill that hole? Are you sure maybe you should slow things down? You're not supposed to make big decisions in the first year. And I went to Camp Widow in July of that same year, I think. And it was right about the time Kyle and I had decided to start dating. And I went and I told the other widows that I just met there that I was dating somebody, and not one of them said anything like that. They said, that's amazing. I don't know if I'm ready to date, but it's amazing that you've decided to do that. There was no judgment. There was no like, well, have you really thought about this hard? It was so refreshing just to have somebody accept it.
Yeah, because you've already been through all of that. The last thing you need is judgment on your life and your decision on your life, because this is your life.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and it's not like we don't yeah, we're grieving. We're thinking about it constantly. We don't
Yeah.
need the reminders. And even if you do, even if it's not in the best judgment, sometimes people just need to do what they have to do to survive. And it's shouldn't be anybody's place to judge them. If that's what they have to do to survive, hopefully it doesn't hurt them. Um,
But
but
you gotta live their life.
sometimes people have to do something.
Hmm. Do you find that you've had to be more aware of where there's healthy support and then people who like you love them, but you realize that they're not going to be supportive, and so you have to distance yourself so that you can take care of your emotional and mental wellness and be able to be the best you can for your family and yourself.
Yeah, I was pretty blessed for the most part, and I didn't have anybody really close. I did have a few friends that really just could not get on board with me dating Kyle. And they were close friends before that, and I still like them and I still care about them and I wish them well. But it was at some point where I just couldn't function with them questioning constantly whether I was doing the right thing or you shouldn't do this or and giving me all their opinions all the time. And it was too
That
much
you didn't
because,
want, that you didn't ask for. You're a
yeah,
good woman.
yeah, exactly. So, and that's hard because of course that just adds one more thing you're grieving onto everything else.
Yeah, I went through a divorce, and the one thing people don't realize, there's different types of grief.
Mhm.
There's secondary losses, there's different types of losses and whatnot. And the a year after, I lost a friendship that I knew from 19 years old,
Yeah.
because you go through changes and you change and things change, and what was the foundation of your relationship with people is no longer there. And so I was double grieving, like the loss of him, the loss of her. And I was like, nah, I don't know if I had to go back to therapy, like, how to like process, because it was like a lot of
Yeah.
pain and loss. But I'm happier and better, but it took time to get there.
When you were going through that, did you even recognize you were grieving at the time?
Which part, the him or her?
Either one.
Well, when I was grieving before the divorce,
Hmm.
because there were things that were going on way before. It's just it finally, the separation finally happened. But the way it happened was, I was on vacation that I found out I was gonna get divorced. So I think that's why it made it harder. And then I was
Yeah.
living out of country. When she and I stopped being friends, I ended up turning to my ex-husband for support, because I was like,
Yeah.
that was like my two closest
Need
relationships.
somebody to talk to.
Yeah. And so
Yeah.
when I confided in him, he did the best he could, but there's a reason why we got divorced,
Yeah.
and so, um, yeah, it's not easy, but you can't keep people who weren't intended to be in your life longer than
No.
they were. You know what I mean? You can wish them the
It's,
best, but
and there's different ways to do it. And I think it just comes down to what you need for yourself. And sometimes it's completely cutting off from that person. Sometimes it's saying, here are my boundaries. I would love it if we can stay within these boundaries and that just be like, that's what I can give you now. I can give you this, or we can do nothing. But um, I think it can be helpful to identify that and really, really talk to people about it. I don't know. I like talking about it now because I think I've talked about it so much that I find I feel better about me and I feel more healed when I do share. But a lot of people don't want to. And so it can be a hard conversation to just explain to a friend as your friendships change that this is my capacity right now. And I can't deal with all this other stuff. And so let's figure out a way we can make this work, or unfortunately we're not going to be able to make it work because I do have to put my own mental health ahead of it.
yeah, I say it's protecting energy.
Hmm.
Um, when you go through what we've been through, you only have so much, right? Because you have your
Yeah.
kids, and then
Hmm.
like you have your spouse. There's so much energy you can exchange with other people outside of those people.
Yeah.
And so you're gonna have to start saying, I think I've learned to say no faster
Yeah.
and easier than before, because
Hmm.
I'm not here to people please. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that was my tendencies before, but I'm getting better at it because I gotta
Hmm.
be in more safe relationships. That's the
Yeah.
best way to explain it.
that was one of the best things I got out of therapy after my cousin had died the same time or the same year my husband had died. And after that was when I finally realized I probably needed to go talk to somebody. And my sister had recommended a transformative coach. And I was talking to her about dating Kyle and struggling with a lot of the judgment. She's like, what does it matter what they think? It is not your job to make everybody else happy. It's not your job to make people comfortable. It's your job to take care of yourself.
No,
And I
it's
think
true.
she probably told me that 2 or 3 times before it started actually
Sinking
sinking
in.
in. But it's like, I can still be very polite and tell them, I don't care what you think about my life or my choices.
No, but that's something we weren't raised to do. A lot of
Mhm.
times we're in school or in a family setting, you obey, you
Yeah.
have manners, and you just do what you're told.
Mhm.
But you become an adult, and then you put in situations where you're like, I don't feel comfortable. I don't agree. But why are you gonna keep battling this situation?
Mhm.
I can be cool with you.
Yeah.
Peace. I wish
Yeah.
you guys like this is a an option. It's not like a mandatory.
Yeah. It's interesting. But yeah, the amount of time early on in grief, and I still very much, like when my husband died, I was very much in shock. So still looking back, I have big holes in my memory. But I remember being worried about what people would think. And at the same time, knowing I had to do things like I had to get my kids to daycare, I had to go to work.
Mm,
But I only had so much energy to give, like you said. And so by the time I got myself dressed and the 2 kids dressed, I didn't have energy to put on shoes. I wore slippers to work for like 3 months because I just did not have the capacity. It's like, I can either wear these slippers to work or I'm not going to go to work. So those are the 2 options.
right. I'll
Um,
be there, but
yeah.
so I had this like this was I don't know if this was after before my dad died or after. So okay, the hair comb, like the little hair
Hmm.
comb.
Yep.
I went like I don't know if a month or more, and that's the only way I would style my hair. I would put it
Yeah.
in a bun and stick the thing in because I just didn't like I just emotionally didn't have the energy to style my
Hmm.
hair because like I have like all
Yeah.
this hair, and my son got annoyed like Mom, take it out, like no, no, and I just had this like no, I had to. I don't
Yeah.
know what it was. It's just that's where I was at,
This
but
is what I can give to
yeah.
this part of it. Yeah. It was kind of funny because eventually I got to where I could put on shoes, but nobody ever mentioned anything about me wearing slippers to work. And I don't know if they just didn't want to bring it up because they thought I'd come apart, which it's possible that I
Oh,
would have.
yeah.
But I think I wore my slippers for like an extra 2 or 3 weeks just to see if people would mention it ever. Nobody ever did, which I appreciate because that was
Yeah,
the
that
best I could
compassion,
do. But
compassion.
yeah.
Can you share with them? You wrote a book. Can you?
Did.
Yes, I wanna hear it. And what got you to do it? Because a lot of people, and I'm putting myself in the box. We have ideas of one day I want to write a book, but the reality we think of all these we
Yeah.
overthink it. Can you share what gave you the courage to just do it?
So I think it really happened after Kyle and my daughter died.
Mm.
Before that, I'd been just kind of like writing down notes. It's like, yeah, maybe one day I'll write a book. And here are these things that I'm realizing as I grow in my grief. I'm realizing all these tidbits and I'd like to somehow put them in a book. And then my daughter died. And locally, there was a woman who was putting on kind of a series of speaking events called Know Your Worth. And it was focused at other women where they could talk about the bad stuff that happened in their life and how they've dealt with it, how they tried to overcome it, if they did bad things, if they found bad coping mechanisms and how they turned those around. Um, and so she asked me to speak about the loss. And this was about 3 months after our daughter had died.
Wow.
And I went and I made note cards and I think I talked for like 2 hours and answered questions. And I had only made it through like 3 of my note cards. And at that point, people came up and they're like, I really enjoyed hearing your story and more or less suggested I write a book.
Wow.
And previous to that, I'd always considered writing like a practical type book because I tend to be a more logic based practical
Right.
person. And so it's like, I want those steps and I know they don't exist, but maybe I can somehow write something in a step format that would work for people who think like me. And then after that talk, I started to realize that, there's power in my story. I didn't have to come up with these other things. to share with people. I could share my story, and I could share that I wore my dead husband's deodorant for 3 years because he had bought a whole bunch of it and I didn't want to throw it away, or
And it reminds you
that,
of him. Yeah.
yeah, well, and yeah, and like a bunch of his clothes we got made into quilts, but I had his underwear. What do you do with his underwear? I tried really hard to find something to do with his underwear. Turns out there's no good thing you can do with underwear. But it's like just sharing things like that, or that I'd get out of the car and I left it running for hours in the driveway just because I forgot to turn it off.
Yeah.
I mean, all those things you do when you're grieving and you're not functioning
Foggy.
properly.
Yeah. You're just like a blur.
And then sharing that along with how I did decide that I wanted to date Kyle, how the risk of dating somebody and loving somebody again put me at risk for dealing with this horrible loss again. But
Mm-hmm.
it was worth it because the love, I wouldn't give up a second with Joe, even knowing how it ended. And I wouldn't give up any of those 3.5 months I had with our daughter, Riley, even knowing how it ends.
Mm-hmm.
And so I, being able to talk about how I came to that point, came to realizing that, love is so much bigger than the grief. They're tied together, but love is bigger because that's why we put ourselves out there.
Yes.
Um,
You take a
and
risk.
yeah. And so I decided just to write my memoir and share it. And I found a really good company that helped me get out of my head a little bit, because when you write and it's going to be a book and there's so much pressure and you want it to be perfect. And I kept editing, like I'd write a sentence and then edit it for 4 hours. And she finally just said, stop, just write it down. Just write it to yourself. Write your story. You know your story. So just write, and then we'll fix things that need to be fixed later.
Right. And then it
So
finally went through.
yeah. So then it's like, oh, okay. So I just wrote it and we had editors review it, and I fixed what they told me needed to be fixed. And
Do you have it on you right now?
I do. I have it right here.
Oh, I love
You can
butterflies.
see it.
Yeah, butterflies.
Yep, butterflies.
Fully
And
into
that's,
darkness.
yeah. So the butterflies came from our daughter because, I mean, she's 3.5 months. So you don't have a whole lot of, she was still developing her personality. And when we were in the hospital with her, we decided she liked butterflies and she liked purple.
Oh,
So we chose butterflies for her headstone, actually. And then for the book, I really think it's important to deal with your emotions. And so that's where the boldly into the darkness, you have to go and face the darkness, face the grief in order to come out of it and live the best life you need.
yeah.
So
You know those ugly cries when you just feel so, you know,
yeah.
you actually need to have those because
Mm-hmm.
when you have it, it scares you because it's so like overwhelming. But I realize that the more you give yourself permission to
Mm-hmm.
flow with it, because that's where you're at, then the bouncing back is easier. But it's the avoiding.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not gonna cry. I'm not gonna
Yep.
feel. I'm not gonna that you when you try to avoid pain, you can't have peace. You can't
Yeah.
have joy. The only thing I wanted after my sister died was peace of mind, and it was hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like I believe in God, I pray and whatnot. It's just that inner peace is like, to me, that is like gold. When you can
Yeah.
get to that point, I think that is the most beautiful thing anybody could have, because life
Mm-hmm.
happened and
Yeah. And I like that you said that you have to embrace it, because even knowing, so the book came out in 2020, so I was working on it in 2019. And even still knowing that I had to embrace my feelings and everything, I think it was only last year where it's like, well, of course you have to embrace it, because if you're pushing the pain away, you're also pushing the happiness away. You're also pushing, but it like, even still, where I had part of this concept developed in my mind just recently, because I keep trying to learn more about my grief, did I realize that, yeah, I was struggling when I was pushing my grief away, because it was really hard to embrace the good things that I did have. It was really hard to embrace my kids laughing, or a flower, or something that I could enjoy, because I was just pushing all of my emotions away.
mm-hmm,
Um,
mm-hmm. Yeah, I was still grieving when my son was born. 2007. My sister had died 2001. I was like, "Ooh, how do I do this?" Because I really missed my sister, but here's this baby, and I didn't think it was fair for him if I didn't, like embrace those smiles, the laughters, and whatnot. And so I had to find harmony
Mm-hmm.
because he needed me.
Yeah.
And so that's why I had to find ways to process. And that's when I started journaling, like writing letters to my sister so that I
Yes.
could, you know what I mean? Well, no, before he died, before my son was born, but I started writing letters. And then so that was my safe place
Yeah.
to acknowledge those thoughts and feelings and stuff. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's like what you do, writing.
No. Everybody expects me to say I journaled a lot, and I tried and I did, and I put too much pressure on myself when I was journaling
Yeah.
that I'd end up not writing anything.
Yeah.
So I didn't. I was really bad at that. And it can be so helpful for people. Now, writing the book, when I just let myself write my story, I realized a lot of things as I was going through it and thinking about what had happened in my life. I was able to come up with these realizations and be like, oh, that's why I did that. That's why I felt that. Actually, in my book, I talk about having miscarriages
Mm.
and how when I did have those, because this was before Joe died, I didn't know I was grieving that loss. I thought I was just sad. And I thought I was doing it wrong because apparently everybody has miscarriages and nobody talks about them. And
No,
so,
yeah, and that's another important topic too. Like normalizing talking about those things
yeah,
as if it didn't hurt. Of course it hurts.
yeah. So 1 in 4 women has a miscarriage. Why are you so sad? It's like, well, I am, but I didn't know I was grieving then. And
Hmm.
so, and there's a lot of situations when I was writing the book that I'd look back and be like, oh, that's what was going on with my feelings and my emotions at that point. And so it was really helpful for me to have kind of that really in-depth look and that self-reflection to
And
learn more about myself and my grief.
can you share a little bit about I have people that I've connected with through the podcast that are dealing with child loss. Do you have anything that you've learned that you wanted to share?
I think child loss is all loss is hard. They just have different nuances. And I think the thing with child loss that I really struggled with was it's my job to protect her and to make sure she was safe. And I know back with Joe, we live in a very rural area. Our kids run wild. They're outside all the time. We'd always joke that as long as we can keep them alive, we're doing good. And then all of a sudden, Kyle and I lose a child. It's like, well, shoot, I defined being a parent by my ability to keep my kids alive. And I failed. And I shouldn't have kept her alive. And the kids shouldn't die before the parents. And there's a lot of guilt associated with that. Um, I think what I ended up having to realize that I did the best. I never wanted any bad to come from her. And she ended up dying from infant botulism, which is a naturally occurring thing, but it is also really common in honey, which we had honey in our house. We fed the older kids honey. Maybe there was honey on our fingers that went into her mouth and caused, I mean, your mind goes through all these what ifs, could have happened, should have happened, it was my fault type of situations. And I really just to get that peace of mind, and it's still hard and sometimes it goes away for a while, but to get that peace of mind, I had to convince myself that I loved her and I did my best by her and I would have given anything to keep her here. And that has to be enough. I don't think anybody who loses a child did so on purpose.
Right.
And so if you did the best you could, even if it was an accident, even if it was something that could have been prevented, if you did the best you could, that has to be enough, or else it will absolutely eat you alive.
Mm. Sorry, I'm like, and I think that is something that we have to take to heart that sometimes we can't prevent everything.
Yeah.
Well, as much as we love people, things happen.
Yeah. I really like being in control. um, our kids with Joe, we had planned out. We're like, okay, we want to get pregnant at this time. We want the kid to be born in this month, and then they're going to be 2 years apart. And eventually, I'd learned, especially through the grief, that I have very little control over anything. I can control the person I am, and I can control how I react to the things that happen around me. but most of the time I cannot control what happens around me.
Yeah. And even like, before like you make all these plans and stuff, and now I'm like, I'm flexible. Like I'll tentatively make plans, but
Hmm.
I'm flexible and I've learned to, I don't know about you, but have more grace on yourself,
Yeah.
and then sometimes you just do it today and don't even think about tomorrow.
Hmm.
Depending where you're at in your life, because it comes in waves,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. I think some days the most you can do is get up. Maybe some days you can't even get up, and letting that be okay. Um, Another thing I'd realized when I was writing the book, that I think I've heard so many people who are grieving, and I felt it myself, hate it when people come up and be like, "You're so strong. I
Oh
don't know
my
how I do this. You're so strong." And we all hate it because we don't feel strong.
God.
There, people are telling us we're strong because we're surviving and we don't feel strong. And it took me writing the book to realize that, yeah, I didn't feel strong, but I was probably stronger than I've ever been because I was surviving.
Mhm.
So even though I felt really weak, got out of bed. Or even when I felt really bad one day, I actually got up and took a shower. If that was all I could do in that day, yeah, dang right, that was strong, because it was me surviving this life altering event.
Oh
Um,
yeah, no, totally. Sometimes I used to get upset, like, do I have a choice?
yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Or like what would hurt is, oh, I don't know how you do it. I couldn't do it if I was you.
Hmm.
Like that's not a compliment. Like, I mean,
No.
that's a backhanded response
Yeah.
to see that, and I'm just like, my goodness. I remember when my dad died, that was really hard because it was unexpected also. And I I got my son to school and I would go back to bed
Yep.
because it was just too much. It was just like
Hmm.
I can't, and then I finally had to go to a grief support group because I couldn't eat already. I was getting to that point.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just can't eat. Nothing tastes the same. I'm just like losing it. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
so just knowing your body and knowing when to get help.
Yeah, I think that's important. I also am a griever who doesn't eat. So I know a lot of people, food is always a hard topic, and people can go both ways. You
Mhm.
can stop eating, and a lot of people completely overeat. Um, I struggled a lot because people were trying to force feed me right after Joe had died. And at that point, it literally made me feel sick. It made my stomach
Or yeah.
hurt. Um, and so people would bring me plates of fruit or meat or bread or whatever, and I just couldn't eat it. And finally, my sister just started bringing me smoothies because she had realized that I was drinking, but I wasn't eating. And
Mm.
so I was really thankful that she was able to give me the help I needed without me having to ask for it. But a lot of people don't have the support like that. And talking to somebody and getting support so they can be like, okay, so you have to take care of yourself at least to a minimal level. So what can you do and how can we make that work for you? Are those conversations are really important.
Yeah, my older sister, so I had two sisters and a brother, but my older sister was one who could foresee my needs. She's the reason why I went to see a therapist because she's like, hey, you're about to be a mom. The things, let me tell you, when you become a parent, the things you never dealt with is going to come up. Go
Yeah.
to therapy. And I was like, what? So then that's when I went, and then I got diagnosed with PTSD. But yeah, my
Hmm.
sister is like, okay, okay, you need help.
Yeah.
Let me
Well,
help you.
that's interesting because that's my sister too. After our cousin had passed away, my sister went and found this transformative coach, and she's like, I really think you need to talk to her. I really think this would help with some
That's
stuff. And she was absolutely right. And I'm so happy I went and did it. And I'd also say though, if you go to talk to somebody and you leave there feeling unhappy with your experience, don't go back to them. Find somebody else. You don't have to stick with the therapist if you don't feel like they're helping you. And just because one doesn't help you doesn't mean other ones won't.
Yeah, no, it's
Because
important. Yeah.
I had tried a few other therapists prior to this coach, and it's like I think the first one I'd gone to, she's like, this was like a week after Joe had died. She's like, so how are you feeling? It's like, okay, I'm done with you. You're a therapist. You should be able to figure out how I'm feeling a week after my husband
Obviously,
died.
I'm shattered.
Yeah. But I think and that's where it's also hard to find it's hard to find support when you reach out and what you found doesn't work for you, because then you have to come up with all that energy all over again to try something else. But it's worth it when you can get the energy to figure it out.
No, and I'm grateful like you decided to do your book, because to you it's like, but for someone who just needs a lifeline, like
Mm-hmm.
that could help them to feel normal and not feel alone. Because even if like we said, like it's all unique, everybody's unique, and we can't fully understand other people's experiences.
Mm-hmm.
But even if you find someone who's like just a little relatable to you, it's like it really helps your heart. You have hope that, okay, if she can, then I can. You know what I mean? And then there's that confirmation, like it isn't easy. It is gonna hurt. Um, and then, on the other side, this, but like just having that, it's so valuable.
It is. I agree 100%. And whether you're finding that in a book or through a podcast or through a support group or however you find it that works for you, um, I do think it can be a turning point for a lot of people in their grief. And you don't get over your grief. You don't move on and leave it all in the past. I always like to look at it as I can either let it crush me or I can pick it up and carry it. So I want to do what I can to pick it up and carry it, because then, I guess, going back to the control issues, then I'm in control of it to some extent instead of just having it tear my life apart.
Right. Yeah. You shift it, so you're horsey backing it instead
Yeah.
of crushing you. You're like, okay, I can stand, and in my own way, I'm gonna be able to manage it. Um,
Yeah.
what is the best way for people to find you?
I am on Instagram's probably the best way and it's at Growing with Grief. Also on Facebook at Growing with Grief. And I do have a website called growingwithgrief.com. And because it was so hard for me to find the resources I needed when Joe died, that's basically all it is. I have lists of books and podcasts and organizations and blogs that I recommend, and I update it not very often, but every few months I'll go in and I'll update some new resources that I found that I like. But my hope is that it can be a little bit of a shopping spot for people who need some support but don't have the energy to look at 30 different websites. They can just kind of read down a list of ones I recommend and hopefully find one that'll work for them.
Yeah, no, and I think it's great. Like you said, you did your own research, and thankfully you're able to find, and so
Mm-hmm.
you can help people. Like, okay, instead of going down that rabbit hole of
Yeah.
finding, try this, and then maybe it'll help you guide you to more resources
Yeah.
and stuff.
So that's my plan there. And then the book's available wherever you get books. And I have it both as a paperback and an ebook and an audiobook, which I narrated, which was a whole nother experience, but I did
Oh
it.
my gosh! Okay.
So my whole purpose is to try to help people. And so I wanted to make sure that it's available in any way people need it. So hopefully people will read my story and get something positive out of it that'll help their lives too.
Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast, and thank you for sharing your story, because like it helps me to be reminded that when we share our stories, we do give hope and we do help one another, so that we don't feel alone. Because although we are alone, there's people that are waiting to know us, and we can love each other and build great relationships to carry on. And so
Yes.
thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. Hold on just a second. And thanks, everybody. You guys have a great day. You guys can follow, subscribe to Healing with Aloha. Aloha.